The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
This is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineering Watch Radio and Global Alert News for the week of Tuesday, August 4th, 2015. The planet and geopolitical conditions are changing so rapidly, it's truly difficult to keep up. Not that many people are even trying. They'll be trying soon when they find out the walls are closing in around them by the day. But the theme of our society is to avoid reality as long as you possibly can, to just pretend it isn't so. The normalcy bias. As long as you can go to a movie, grab a Coke and a popcorn and get a Big Mac afterward, nobody looks past that, or very few people do, even while their immediate surroundings are disintegrating. I was just in the Northern California city of Redding today, again. I'm in town about once a week, and the trees I can see from week to week rapidly deteriorating. And I have an eye for the trees because, as I've mentioned before, my father was an arborist. It's what I did as a young boy and for many years. And I spotted this 7-8 years ago when the trees started to become less healthy, and no one saw it then, or few people did, or no one would acknowledge it. And now, I thought somewhere along the way, as the trees look worse than horrible, that people would start to notice, but it's astounding how few do. We have trees in the middle of a city that was once known for its trees, dropping leaves blowing around like it's late October. These are landscape trees, by the way, and hardy trees like sycamores and ashes and oaks that can't take it anymore. They just can't take the UV. They can't take the lack of humidity. They can't take the toxic rain, and they're dying. And now that die-off will be very rapid. So in the middle of summer, when the trees should be full, with a full crown, they're dead and dying all over the city. And few people even take notice. And even the so-called experts, because all you really have to do with our society is just find an expert to say it's okay. And then everybody buys that, because it's what they want to believe anyway. They don't want to have their bubble of denial popped. So our North State local meteorologist on KRCR News, Channel 7, ABC affiliate, Mike Kruger, apparently had an arborist on recently to say, it's all normal. It's just the drought. Well, if it's just the drought, then why are the landscape trees dying? And if it's just the drought, why is the Cambrian layer, which is the bark, it's the sublayer of the bark where the trees actually feed, why is it completely scorched off the southwest sides? The trees look like they've been hit with a flamethrower. A lot of the trees on the south side. I mean, the bark is burnt clear off the tree. They're burnt to a crisp. Well, you can always find an expert to tell you everything's fine, can't you? Just like, what was George Bush's advice after 9/11? Just go back and start shopping. Everything will be fine. Don't worry about the fact that nothing we've told you is true about this event. Just go back and start shopping. So what else do the experts say? A new article today called "Geoengineering Schemes Sound Too Good to Be True?" ? That's because they are. Study finds that, quote, techno fixes won't be enough to save the planet's oceans in a world where CO2 emissions continue to climb. That's a big lie of omission in many ways, isn't it? It tells us that geoengineering won't be enough. How about geoengineering is helping to push us over the edge? We not only have the quote-unquote experts lying at a level that can barely be comprehended, we have all the so-called journalists, just like much of the rest of society, all too willing to toe that lie, to pretend they have a clue about anything they're talking about. And what else do the experts say? In this particular case on this article, they go on to talk about a historic heat wave ravages the Middle East. By the way, for those that don't know what they're talking about there, we had in Iraq a heat index, and take this one sitting down, this figure is accurate. The heat index in Iraq hit 165 degrees this week. Now, that's not the actual temperature, as some people mistakenly thought. That's the heat index, and that's a temperature in this case of about 125 degrees with humidity levels pushing 50%. This combination creates a heat index, and this heat index is near the top of the scale. The highest on the planet ever recorded is some 10 degrees higher still. But this is the upper limits, and this is unprecedented. All these heat indexes are unprecedented. So anybody who doesn't believe that heat index was that high, I challenge you. Go search it online. Search Iraq heat index 165 degrees. You'll find it. That's when people start dropping dead in the streets. It's called the wet bulb scenario. That refers to a temperature and humidity range that is intolerable for the human body. People die at those temperatures rapidly. This article, which was published today again in Common Dreams, big website, goes on to say, glaciers continue rapidly melting into the sea. Where else would they melt into? German researchers have proven, well, how hard is it to go to a site like Greenland? And we have one study recently that had maybe a dozen top scientists that took about 3 years to come to the conclusion the ice is melting and running into the sea. Wow, that's scary to me that it takes that many scientists to figure that out. And yet, what else do we have scientists telling us it's not even accurate? I mean, at least it took these 12 scientists, if it took them 3 years to figure out that when ice melts, it runs into the sea when it's flowing off an island, at least they were accurate there. What about the scientists that have helped us to have mercury in our teeth? One of the most toxic metals on the planet, let's put it in our mouth. That's a great idea the science community has brought us. What about fluoride in the water? And how readily did they accept this fluoride? And now they're, unfortunately, maybe the thought processes are disrupted enough where many people are unable to face this reality. Maybe they're not firing on all neurons from the fluoride in the water. How many scientists have told us cell signals are safe? That GMOs are safe? Yeah, it kills the bugs. We have GMO plants that actually produce their own insecticide within the plant that kills the bugs, but somehow it's not supposed to harm us, and this is our scientists telling us this. Same scientists telling us vaccines are safe when there's a mountain of data to the contrary. And this notion of sustainability, how many in the scientific community do we hear talking about sustainability, that renewable energy is sustainable? How renewable is renewable energy? And by the way, that's my background. My home's off-grid. I haven't been on the grid for 15 years, so I have a quote-unquote renewable home. Well, what type of greenhouse gases do the production of solar panels produce? Some pretty bad ones. Production of solar panels produce a gas called hexafluoroethane. It's 12,000 times more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. How about nitrogen trifluoride? 17,000 times more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. How about PFTBA, and the chemical name is far too long to pronounce over the air, 71,000 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. Now, I'm simply saying that quote-unquote green energy is not so green. It's a lot greener than fossil fuel. It's a lot better than fossil fuel. I average about 40 kilowatts a day from renewable energy. That's a lot of power. So it's a lot better than fossil fuel, but it's not truly quote-unquote renewable. And many people think, well, we can just burn up all the fossil fuel and then we'll start making solar panels. What do they think it takes to make a solar panel? It takes fossil fuel. And solar panels don't last forever. And batteries are certainly a problem. Batteries are a huge environmental problem. And yet we have, I think I saw an Eveready commercial a few days ago that made a big to-do about the fact that they now have this green battery that uses 4% recycled material. 4%. Big deal. Big deal. It's astounding the little ploys they use to make people feel better about what's going on, while at the same time, the same people ignore the absolute greatest and most horrific all-out assault against life that's happening in the skies every single day, climate engineering. We have a society that pretends to protect our children. How many commercials do we see about all the things we need to do to protect our children while we're poisoning them at the exact same time? And not just from the aerosol spraying in our skies related to climate engineering, but through all the other subjects I just mentioned. The mercury in the teeth, the fluoride being ingested, the chemicals, the vaccines, GMO. I mean, where do you stop? And we pretend to be a society that protects our children? How deep can the hypocrisy go? And what about the ideological groups that grandstand about trying to protect unborn children? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with trying to protect unborn children, but I'm saying how deep is the hypocrisy when as soon as that child is born, they're the same politicians that vote for the GMOs, that know that climate engineering is going on and are doing nothing. And while they're doing something, they're denying it. They're patently, blatantly denying it. They're sending our young men and women into wars of aggression to secure resources they need to build their empire, and they pretend to care about our unborn children? I'm sorry, that hypocrisy doesn't fly with me at all. I'm all for protecting our children, born or unborn. But when anything goes as soon as they're out of the womb, that's hypocrisy. Hypocrisy that, to a degree that's difficult truly to imagine. And I can only think that if, and I'm hypothesizing, I'm not saying I know what's out in the universe there at all. I don't know that anybody does truly, but if there was some intelligent life looking down at our TV screens and looking at what's happening in the world around us, the implosion of our environment, our life support systems, our forests are dying, bugs are dying. We have a 90% decline in aquatic and terrestrial insect life in Shasta, Siskiyou counties in the last 10 years. Shouldn't that alarm somebody? That's in Northern California, and this is across the board. 90% decline. How much longer are we going to be here? Has anybody noticed their windshield is not caked with bugs lately? Because there isn't very many. The lights at night that used to have bugs swirling all around, not many there either. Well, I guess that's why there's no birds, nothing to eat. It goes right up the food chain. So back to any outside intelligence looking at us would have to be scratching their heads thinking this species is hopeless. Let's hope it changes. And again, I'm grateful for all those who are not asleep at the wheel, who are not part of the apathy, who are not part of the hypocrisy. I'm grateful to every single person who is fighting for the common good and trying to raise awareness. And the seeds we're sowing, I've said many times, the seeds we're sowing will be forced to sprout soon as the environment completely implodes. And it is imploding. And the economy will follow. You can't have an economy that's false to begin with that can sustain itself on an environment that will not produce for the human race as it has. 75% of all global GDP has been produced by the environment for free, no more. When you have to farm your fish with toxic chemicals, with 10 pounds of feed fish for every pound of human consumption fish you get, how incredibly backwards is that? We're going to scour up the bottom of the food chain and grind it up into little pellets and feed our farm salmon that used to feed themselves when the ocean was healthy. This is the kind of insanity that should be astounding to people, and yet they seem to think it's all normal. They've seen so many science fiction movies where we're all floating around in hovercrafts and so forth, and little biodomes with people growing food, and this is fantasy. It's absolute fantasy. When the environment doesn't function anymore, that's the end of the road for us. So let's hope people wake up. That's kind of a long rant, but we get the idea. We all need to keep sounding the alarm. Doug and Russ, sorry to monologue so long. I know you're both with me. Russ, what's it like where you're at right now? And I'll give you a weather report from here.
Dane, he might be in the screening room actually, talking to some people.
I'm not sure where Russ is. And okay, let's try this again. Doug, weather report from where you're at.
With you.
Okay, Russ, what's it like where you're at?
Sorry about that. We had button problems here.
What's the weather like where you're at?
So we have various storms going through. We've got 50 to 60 mile an hour isolated storm just went through. Didn't directly hit me, but just went south of where I am. Freak weather warning, very strange, of course, as we have so much strange weather. The other thing, Dane, that I noticed so much today when you were looking at radar is in the old days, and I call them the old days as if they're something that long ago, but before all of this, the spraying started so widespread, I remember when these weather fronts were well isolated. They were very uniform, and they would come through, and they would do their thing, and then they would pass. Today, we have these big, huge, spotty type of systems that just come through and just keep on coming for days and days. So it's just, you also mentioned about dying trees. Seeing that here, got a tree right out back that's just dead.
Little breakup on your end, Russ. I'm not sure what's up. The audio's coming and going a little bit, but anyway, continue. We can hear you.
Okay. We have had a big old tree out back that actually was shaded part of the garden. Just to completely die this year, Dane. In fact, it's ironic because we were thinking about trimming it a little bit to provide more sunshine for the garden. This year, that tree has not a single leaf on it. Just decided not to grow leaves this year, Dane.
We have that kind of thing happening everywhere here. It's happening everywhere here in Northern California. We see trees right now that didn't have any leaves that now are putting out a couple leaves in the middle of summer. Other trees that started with leaves have now dropped all their leaves. Nothing really knows what to do, and the environment is spinning this wildly out of control, and the UV is what it is, and the toxic metals and so forth, but trees are dying all over the globe.
Yeah, I know, and you brought up mercury a minute ago about what kind of geniuses decided to put mercury in vaccines and mercury in teeth. Who decided to put mercury in light bulbs? Now, we know that fluorescent lights have been around for a long time, and the green-tipped fluorescents are fluorescents, and we actually did a test years ago, Dane, and it wasn't a scientific test, but we found there was so much that our readings from the low mercury fluorescent bulbs as compared to a regular fluorescent bulb, because we know those have mercury in them, our readings were actually higher for the low mercury fluorescents. And one other thing is we also included in our test compact fluorescent bulbs, the little swirly lights that a lot of people are being forced to buy now because it's harder and harder to get incandescent bulbs, which have no mercury in them, by the way. These CFL bulbs had so much mercury in them when we tested them that our meter was incapable of reading it. It was above the limit. So referring back to what you about the genius of putting mercury everywhere, it just continues, Dane.
Well, and these are our environmentally friendly bulbs, right? That you don't want to break open because they're so incredibly toxic. And this is the society we live in, a society where our skies look like something from another planet. And at least you guys are getting rain back east, and I think, Doug, you're getting some rain too, I believe, right? If I can get Doug on real quick.
Yeah. Yep.
Chime in. You're getting rain where you're at as well too, right? So
we have been. It's been kind of dry the last couple of days, but we've had a little bit of rain here and there. Yep. We've
been dry the last 6 months. I mean, and this is in a boreal rainforest, so we have skies that are completely featureless from horizon to horizon. It's absolutely historically unprecedented, and nobody seems to remember what a storm looked like, what convective clouds look like, where you see the sun shining through the clouds and spots. It's just this uniform, industrial-looking, featureless sky as they aerosolize any moisture that comes across us, dry as a bone below, no humidity, really, and this is the norm. So we have these periods of quote-unquote cloud cover that's so aerosolized you can't make out the definition of an individual cloud. It's just all melted together with the aerosols. No water falls out of it for months at a time, and nobody seems to remember how it should be. And that's shocking to me. Nobody seems to remember how a tree should look like. As parking lots are covered with leaves in the end of July, beginning of August, covered with leaves falling off trees that are dying, stone dead, flashing out, landscape trees, trees that are definitely being watered, but they're dying anyway. And people don't seem to remember, but they will soon. And again, I stress that there is no hiding this much longer. That's not my opinion. It's not because I pretend to have a crystal ball. It's simply a fact. When nature can no longer produce what it has in order to keep the human race moving forward, that's where collapse happens. And it's happening now. It's happening now. We have several dozen countries descending into chaos right now. And it all comes down to resources. That's what it's all about. That's the only true currency on the planet, is resources. The rest is a facade. Money is not truly a resource. It's just a card house that's, again, collapsing. But, Russ, if you can, on the situation with what I would like to discuss a bit amongst whatever else someone wants to bring up, is the fact that our science community that has no trouble lying, no trouble at best telling the most elemental truth, as I mentioned in Greenland, 3 years and a dozen scientists to determine that water melts and runs into the sea. Science community that has built so many of the world's top habitations at sea level, habitations that are going to be uninhabitable in the not so distant future. The scientists that have told us this and that is renewable or sustainable. There's nothing sustainable about our scenario, nothing, and that will be very starkly clear soon. So maybe we could discuss a little bit about the hypocrisy of the so-called experts that we're told to believe without questioning, and how much more wrong could they be. Doug, can you give the phone number and we can maybe take a call or two?
Absolutely. Our call-in number is 929, area code 477-2297. Again, 929-477-2297. And we do have Michael from Canada on the phone if you want to talk to him.
Yeah, let's get Michael on and see what he has to say.
Okay, I'm here now.
You there, Mike?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I hear you good, Michael.
Okay, good.
How are you?
So, quick, dry, hot, not so good in that regard. Quick weather update for the island here. I heard that for a while now, the whole entire island's been on max level drought alert. My mom even told me a funny thing about a comment she saw when level, because it goes up to 4 levels for drought alert, and the comic was saying that the level 4 is panic now because there is no level 5.
Yeah, it's that bad all over. What else? What else is going on up there?
Well, you were just mentioning how you just mentioned how there's no moisture anymore because of the aerosol spraying. And I was just thinking again, confirming that I haven't seen dew up here since winter when it was frost, when it was dew. There's just absolutely nothing coming on there, and I'm thinking that pretty soon, from that recent graph that you posted on GeoWatch, that soon the entire western half of this continent, including up to the island here, is going to look like that big red spot on that graph that California currently is.
It is. Thank you for bringing up the dew issue, because that's just one more thing that people don't seem to notice. It's the same here in Northern California. The only time you might see some is the day after a rain. You might have a little more condensation form, and other than that, it just doesn't exist anymore, as these desiccant, which are moisture-absorbing particles, suck the moisture out of the atmosphere and out of the foliage. And the trees have what's called stomata. They're respiratory pores, and they close those pores to try to save their moisture so they can't breathe. They can't respirate. So you have boreal forests around the globe that were the second largest source of oxygen on the planet, next to plankton only, that now aren't producing any oxygen. They can't feed, so they can't uptake carbon, and they can't exhale oxygen. They can't. So again, just to try to allude to the chain reaction that occurs when you start meddling with these systems. But anyway, your trees, how are they doing up there, Michael?
Like I said, we're probably a year or two behind the kind of damage that you're seeing, and they still do look prolific here, but it's only a matter of time. Maybe some plants around are starting to limp pretty bad because, like I said, we're past 3 months now with only one rainfall since then, and the entire island's in its maximum level of drought warning. So.
And you guys had, give me historically, Michael, where you're at in a normal year, how much of the year, how many months in the year would you expect to have on and off rain where you live? Normally.
On and off rain. Well, all of them except one maybe, but I only moved here a couple years ago. So I'm like seeing the weather here in the heat of the breakdown. But even just a couple years ago, like I said when I first called, that it was only maybe 1 month in the middle of summer where it was hot and dry, and then it was back to being what this place is, a temperate rainforest. But now this year, there's 3 months and one rainfall. It's not going to last much longer.
This is what's happening here. I mean, when I moved here in 2001, and I'm in northeast of Reading. Reading gets about 33 inches of rain a year. Where I live, the normal annual is 70 inches. It's a lot more rain. And it rained about 8-9 months a year off and on. And then we might get a thunder shower or two over the summer. Now we get rain 1 or 2 months a year, and the rest is dry. And we certainly have no chance of a thunder shower because anytime any monsoonal moisture moves in, it's just aerosolized into nothing. It doesn't really develop. You get a shower here and there, but nothing like what should have happened. So we've gone from 8 or 9 months of relatively damp weather to 1 or 2. And then in the middle of winter, we're 80, 90 degrees in the Northern California, the North State region. So it's no wonder nothing can live. And one final paragraph of this article that was just released again today by Common Dreams, and I think other sites have posted it too. It says, this is from the lead scientist, it would be irresponsible based on all we know so far to expect climate engineering to significantly contribute to solving the problem of climate change in the next several decades. Said Mark Lawrence, the project's coordinator and scientific director of the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies. Now, I just want to consider what he just said. It would be irresponsible, based on all we know so far, to expect climate engineering to significantly contribute to solving the problem of climate change. Now, what planet is this guy living on? I'm serious. This is what we have in academia. It's beyond belief. What planet is he living on when we have 65 years of climate engineering already going on, a planet that is free-falling into total extinction, 6th great mass extinction right now, and he, after all his study, comes to the conclusion that it would be irresponsible to say it's going to solve the problem? Russ, Michael, what's your comment on a scientist who is that completely detached from blaring, blatant realities that are right in front of our face? What's your feeling about that, Michael?
Well, it's something that I wonder about whenever we're talking about these reports from scientists saying that climate engineering can't work. I'm wondering, are they drawing that from tests and models, or are they drawing that secretly from the 65 years of experiments that have been going on for it?
Well, that's a good question, and let's look at another incredibly, an equation that is so ludicrous and so wrong. How could it even be considered? Ocean fertilization. So we have oceans that are already acidifying. They're 30% more acidic than they were before the Industrial Revolution. We have shellfish that can't produce shells. We have, a whole host of cascading negative effects are happening, and yet this is another form of geoengineering, ocean fertilization. Let's create plankton blooms by dumping hundreds of thousands of tons of iron oxide into the ocean, which is a massive contaminant in the first place, but to cause these plankton blooms to suck up tens of millions of tons of CO2, which makes the ocean more acidic. And we have scientists that are suggesting this. Well, Russ, and all your thoughts. Maybe Michael, then Russ, and Doug.
It's pretty bad. It's total scam, fraud, and don't know how these guys think they're going to be able to survive themselves to get away with this.
Does it shock you, though, that this is a quote-unquote expert, and our society is trained to listen to these quote-unquote experts that say things that a 10-year-old child could figure out is not correct, that is patently wrong?
No, that doesn't surprise me at all. I've been on the internet long enough to not be surprised by human stupidity. So it never ceases to astound me that the society is so willing to listen to the experts. Russ, your thought on that kind of scenario, that we have a scientist here, lead scientist, after all his research, saying
that climate engineering, spraying our sky with toxic metal nanoparticulates, will not really solve the problem of climate change, as if that somehow would make everything go away. And then ocean fertilization, I mean, that kind of stupidity, again, the mercury in the mouth, where would we stop? But the quote-unquote experts, in too many categories to go into, how incredibly ridiculous and wrong their statements of conclusion are. How do you feel about that, Russ?
Well, Dane, as someone who's been mercury poisoned, the idea of putting mercury in your mouth, putting mercury in the lamps that we're gonna break in our houses, because every 5 years somebody breaks a light in their house. Back when you look at these issues, when you look at the mercury and all the that it causes, you can trail. You can say, well, there is a lobby that is paying politicians to approve these. And ultimately, those people who are paying those lobbyists are the pharmaceutical industry. So you have the money, and you can actually see that's fitting from this. When you have this madness going on where we're going to spray toxins into the atmosphere and it's going to acidify the soils in the oceans, it makes me wonder, who is ultimately going to profit? I know Labs came out a few years ago with this plan of using sulfur-impregnated carbon rods to remove mercury from soils. And this was after several years previous, there were all these articles about the soils in the U.S. being inundated with mercury, and they were saying it was coming from Chinese power plants. So, it sounds like is what I'm trying to say. There's corruption going on. No scientist in their right mind would make these types of decisions, and we just have to find out, what is the game? What are they doing? What is the ultimate end game of what they're doing?
Well, I think you hit on a lot of it. It's the money. Doug, your input there real quick, and then I want to rebut to this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a lot to add other than, to me, it reminds me of the pharmaceutical industries as well. I mean, the vaccine industry alone, where they're completely protected. They have no liability whatsoever. They can put out any product they want and not be held liable if they cause death or injury. And, it's the same people that do their own research, and they put out these studies, and they pay to have the studies come out a certain way. To me, it's a little bit like that.
It's a lot like that. In fact, let's look at Bhopal. Most Americans don't know what happened in Bhopal, India. About 25,000 people died because of a chemical plant, U.S. manufacturer that was, I believe, DuPont. The chemical plant blew up. That many people dead, still affected. Nobody says a word about it. And the pharmaceuticals, again, as I've mentioned many times, what kind of society could watch their TV and look at a commercial pushing a pharmaceutical product that then lists the consequences that are so horrific that you can't imagine who in their right mind would possibly take that substance. And the next commercial, of course, is the attorney saying, if you took the thing we advertised for last week and you're permanently damaged or dead, you can sue. Well, this is what we have. And when we have, again, the greatest lie of all, above all the rest of this, that we have what's happening in our skies that clearly is climate engineering, exactly as described by every science institution out there. This is exactly what they want to do, to block the sun with jets spraying particulates. But that's not what you see above you. Even though it looks the same, the material's the same. We have governments are saying we have to do this right away. I mean, every dot, virtually everything says, including film footage of them spraying at altitude, turning on and off, nozzles visible, patently, blatantly obvious climate engineering is and has been going on, and yet we have how many experts saying, no, it isn't so, it's just condensation. I mean, this is the emperor has no clothes to a degree that can barely be imagined, is it not? Michael, if you're still with us, I think we have to get another caller in a minute, but let's get a final response from Michael, and we'll take somebody else.
Yeah, that's definitely how it is. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you good, Michael. And I mean, doesn't it just? Do you feel like? And I feel like this a lot. I feel like I'm waking up into a B horror movie every day, and you see this stuff happening around you, and you're screaming at the top of your lungs. You've put 12 years of your life on hold. You're spending every dime you have trying to put out resources to try to wake people up, and yet they just want to stay in that bubble, but they're not going to have the choice much longer. So, Michael, I appreciate what you're doing in Canada. I really do. And keep us posted, and we'll try to grab another one here in a minute. But I want to get Russ and Doug their take on how incredibly astounding it is that we can have this going on in our skies and have the experts telling us what we see with our own eyes isn't so. Russ?
Yeah, to me, Dane, it's corruption all the way. There's a lot. The corruption in itself is stupidity, because how many times in history have people allowed themselves to be hurt by their own corruption for gain? They think they're gaining something in the long term, but in the short term, but in the long term, they're harming themselves, harming other people, and the corruption is just unfathomable. And this goes all the way back to the amalgam fillings and the toxic additives in vaccines and other things that don't have to be that way. So, it's just more of the same. Dane, Doug?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. The power structure has put this matrix in place, and the matrix that we all live in, and we're all subject to it. And some people will eventually realize what's going on, and other people won't. I mean, it's just part of the makeup of the matrix, and that's just where we are. So I think some people are, even though they're getting a paycheck to do a certain job, hopefully they will wake up and before it's too late. I mean,
it's certainly a matrix. Yeah, go ahead, Russ.
I'd love to is that a lot of people realize this, but the state of Maine actually did a study on compact fluorescent light bulbs, and I don't mean to go back to this, but this is a huge issue. If you drop one of those in a room in your house, and then you do an EPA-approved cleanup, according to the EPA instructions, the levels of mercury will often rise, not once in a while, but often rise so far above the minimum allowed levels, the maximum contaminant levels for the workplace, they will be several times higher continuous. You open a window, you're in a closed room. So if you're in the north, you have closed all year, you drop a compact fluorescent light bulb in your house, in a room in your house, you do an EPA-approved cleanup in that house, the mercury levels will still be at disease-causing levels. It's unbelievable that this kind of thing would even go on. But then again, corrupt.
And that's our environmentally safe light bulb. And this is where, again, the hypocrisy is absolutely astounding in our society, and people who have bought into the notion that this stuff can keep going on the way it is. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it can't keep going. And we have in Northern California, for the event that's coming up again, August 14th, we have now, I just delivered today to the Northern California primary newspaper, the Record Searchlight, 16,000 copies, color, glossy, heavy paper, 100-pound paper, 8.5 by 11, very expensive quality flyers that will go into every single paper on Tuesday, which would be, the 11th, I believe. It'll be Tuesday the 11th, yes. So that paper will now be utilized for getting the word out on climate engineering, and they have done nothing. That publication has done nothing but fight us on this issue, nothing but continue to use the chemtrail term when we only use the scientific terms, climate engineering, solar radiation management. They have done everything to marginalize this issue. And perhaps we'll have a little bit of poetic justice that now our flyers will be going out to every one of their readers, and hopefully their readers will attend this event to learn what's really going on, instead of what the bought and paid for media is telling them is going on, or not telling them what's going on. So it's up to the individual to find out, and we're going to check those papers to make sure that those flyers go in and not somewhere else, because I know that there's people in that organization that would probably do anything to try to hide this issue. They have. I mean, I spoke to a reporter from this paper going back 7 years, and I stressed over and over, please don't use the chemtrail term and attribute it to me. I don't use that term. It's not a scientific term. And what did that reporter use throughout his article? It's the only term he used. That's what these people are paid to do, to be underhanded, not objective, to be underhanded. And I hope the people in the journalism world realize that that paycheck isn't going to mean anything when you're staring at your child, knowing that you contributed to the complete destruction of their future for a paycheck and a pension that is now gone, and the world on which your child depends is gone with it. So I hope people find their courage. But anyway, Doug, I don't know if we got anybody on hold right now.
Yeah, Kim's actually waiting to talk to you.
Okay, Kim, what's on your mind? We still have Kim?
Hi, sorry, I put it on mute because I ended up going in the kitchen and I was making some sense. Yes, everything you guys are talking about, I can definitely relate to. When we were talking about the light bulbs and the cleanup precautions that Russ was talking about, I read a lot about that, and if you drop a light bulb like that, you have to sweep it up a certain way, or there's a potential that you're going to inhale it. And when I started learning about this, because it was published studies, I thought, well, that's pretty bad. If it's that bad for you, why am I hanging it in my ceiling? This is ridiculous.
Let's take that back into the mercury. On your point, Kim, to elaborate on that, let's take that point back into the mercury fillings. Okay, you drop the light bulb, you have to clean it up a certain way to avoid total contamination. What about mercury fillings? And Russ, you can chime in on this because I know you've had yours taken out, but it's my understanding that if the mercury fillings are improperly removed, they will expose your body to more mercury than you would have already been exposed to from having those fillings for the rest of your life, doing more damage and permanent contamination if they're improperly removed, which most dentists do not know how to properly remove these fillings. So what does that amount to? They put a ticking time bomb in your mouth that is going to come out sooner or later. Russ, on the fillings, what's your take?
Yeah, it is a ticking time bomb. You know, according to Dr. Hal Huggins, who was one of the leaders in the United States in getting amalgam removed, and more than 50, or at least raising awareness about it, because it's been outlawed in many European countries, and today over 50% of dentists in the United States do not use amalgam anymore. But he revealed and exposed that the American Dental Association, now this is the group that was the primary organization that was pushing the use of amalgam fillings in the United States. The American Dental Association of Chicago held the patent for amalgam fillings. Now that patent is long run out, but according to Dr. Huggins, they were making about $50 million a year on the patent licensing rights for amalgam fillings until they ran out. Well, also we know that mercury causes, this is Dr. Hal Huggins, and I completely agree with him because my research lines up with what he said, 200 of the most common diseases today can be caused by mercury. I'm not saying they're all caused by mercury entirely, but mercury can be a causative factor in 200 of the most common diseases today. That is a huge statement. And when you look at the abscesses of disease from mercury, it's amazing when you start connecting one disease after another. Well, who profits from this? Who profits? And again, I feel it's follow the money. They profit from a mercury-contaminated home. They profit from mercury, such a disease-causing metal. And the other advantage from their perspective, from the pharmaceutical company perspective, is that the diseases take years or decades to manifest. So you may get a vaccine, and 20 years later, you'll get arthritis, you'll start having a whole host of other health issues. So again, you follow the money. The same people who are voting to allow these things, who are always pushing these contaminants on the public, are the ones who are receiving the largest donations from the pharmaceutical companies. So it's business as usual in their court.
It is business as usual. And as you get, right now around the globe, let's tie this back into climate engineering. And Kim, I'm not sure where you're at exactly at your location. I'm not sure if you're hot or cold right now because temperatures are going up and down like a teeter-totter. Are you hot or cold this week out there, Kim?
We've been dealing with some extremely humid, very high dew points and some high temperatures. But then there was a couple of days in the last month where it was bone-chilling cold. Made no sense at all. The sun was completely blocked out. You could see they were flying over, and suddenly it's cold out. When it looks silver, it's going to be cold. But then I saw a storm system come in tonight, and I heard Russ was mentioning that earlier, that there was this bizarre storm system came in, and it literally looked like a funnel cloud. It went right over the house that I'm living in, went right over us. And I filmed it, took pictures of it. I saw bizarre colors. I saw bizarre shapes. I saw bizarre wind patterns. I saw clouds going in 3 different directions, and yet nobody was noticing this. And
well, you guys,
great, lights out.
The eastern half of the U.S. lower 48 continues to be in the geoengineered cool down zone off and on, while the rest of the world is frying, absolutely frying. Here's a new article today. Record heat stroke victims taken to hospital last week. This is in Japan. The number of people across Japan taken to hospitals by ambulances due to heat stroke or heat exhaustion stood at 11,672. Now let's jump back to 11,672. Now let's jump back to Iraq. This is a 2-hour-old article. Temperatures are going even higher, perhaps pushing a feels-like temperature of 170 degrees. Now, I'm not misquoting that, and I'm not saying that's the actual temperature. That's the heat index temperature. So we're talking about temperatures of 51, 52 degrees C, about 125 degrees Fahrenheit in that range, with humidity of 50%. The human body can't deal with that. Again, we're into the wet bulb syndrome. And does our media report this? No, they don't report it. And what did we have again? Again last weekend, we had fires, state of emergency in California, fires burning down homes all over. And what did we have on the Weather Channel? We had, and I'm not kidding, we had a series of episodes of Fat Guys in the Woods. That's a Weather Channel reality show. And again, I stress, when Boston was getting snow, they would stop their reality show coverage all weekend long. Which, why do you have Weather Channel? I didn't buy Weather Channel to watch reality shows, and they have some of the most ridiculous reality shows on there all weekend long. You can't get weather on the Weather Channel. Half the time during the week you can't get weather unless there's an engineered cool-down event, in which case all the reality programming goes off. All they do is harp the cool down, Boston snow, Boston snow, Boston snow, but they don't talk about the fact that Washington, Oregon, California burning to the ground, Alaska burning to the ground. No. They show us Fat Guys in the Woods. I'm not kidding. So anyway, that ought to be a red flag, considering who owns Weather Channel, Blackstone and Bain Capital, part of the power structure. That should be a big red flag as to what the power structure wants us to know at this point. They do not want people waking up to the fact that they have helped to completely destroy the climate. Climate engineering is a huge part of that, not the only part by any means, but a huge part of it. And they simply now are trying to hide it to the last minute while we all get sicker by the day. Russ, you're not feeling all that well, given the fact you have to suck this stuff up every day, right?
No, I'm not at all. I mean, when the plumes come through, it will wake me up out of sleep, give me migraines, make me feel quite bad. And, getting back to the media that you talked about a minute ago, too, back in 2008, right around there, Clear Channel came in and bought up virtually all of the radio stations in this area, in the Bangor, Maine area. And so we've seen this massive consolidation of media, Dane, so we can't get any real news. We only get what comes through the tight-handed filter of these corporations. And some of these corporations are owned by some very interesting characters tied to very powerful people. I mean, it's just when you start drawing the lines, you start putting interesting things together. What was it? Weather.com that was purchased a couple of years ago, Dane? What was the large weather information?
Climate by Monsanto for $970 million. Climate Corp. Now, how could a weather disseminating office agency that is not a big facility, how could that possibly be worth nearly $1 billion? How is that possible? And why in the world did Monsanto need to buy it? And why do the Rothschilds own Weather Central? So you have Bain Capital and Blackstone with Weather Channel. You have Rothschilds own Weather Central. and Monsanto owns Climate Corp because they have to control the message. The power structure has to control the message, or they might start talking about, oh, by the way, the heat index is 165 degrees in the Middle East right now, and people are dropping like flies in Japan, and Siberia is burning to the ground. You might hear a little bit of that otherwise, but instead, what do we hear? We're entering an ice age. Well, on what planet? Exactly on what planet are we entering an ice age? And I hope people stop buying the headlines, because the headlines are nonsense. And yes, we all hate Al Gore. We all do. I don't know anybody that likes Al Gore, and I certainly don't. But let's keep our feet grounded on reality, so we might have a chance at uniting with the climate science community that so far has been complete cowards. Not just cowards, but tyrants with towing the line for the power structure. And in their defense, a lot of them are dying. Russ, Doug, have you seen the fact that a lot of climate scientists are dying strange accidents and
I've
so
seen
forth?
it. Yeah, I've seen it. Doug, have you? Yeah.
I'm noticing that, and also the holistic health doctors too. They're just dropping like flies.
Boom. So in their defense, when people question why wouldn't they speak out, well, it's not just a bad career decision. It seems to be a bad decision for wanting to stay alive with certain people. And some of the people who die, one Greenland scientist that died spectacularly in a plane crash some months back was the type to speak out. And we even had Peter Wedhams, the frontline Arctic researcher, state on the record he's lost 3 colleagues recently, all strange deaths, and he felt it was beyond what an accident is. And then he was immediately probably pressured or put into a corner, and he retracted his statement. That's how the power structure works. But when we know on the climate engineering issue, again, people talk about, well, there would be a whistleblower. Why would there be a whistleblower? When people, and especially an issue of this gravity or this magnitude, why would someone just step forward and one, even if they did, how long would they make it? How do we know someone hasn't stepped forward and ended up dead like the rest of them? And they would never be put on the mainstream media anyway, would they? Russ, if someone steps forward, power structure's not going to put a whistleblower on.
No, in fact, Dane, what happens is after Clear Channel took over all the local stations, I started doing research on local stations because I wanted to approach them about helping us to expose this issue. And the replies that not myself, but other people, not only myself, but other people have gotten from these stations that have been taken over by Clear Channel, the handful of corporate conglomerates that own all media, they say to us, we have a specified set of topics that we talk about, and this topic does not fall within that construct. We're sorry.
But how many people do you know? But Russ, how many people do you know that are all too happy to hear that would tell you, oh, you got that information on the internet, as if it can't be trusted? So on the internet, I can go straight to the horse's mouth. I can get information directly from a frontline site, for example, whether it's Arctic Research or anything else, not filtered to the media. But yet, how many people, Russ or Doug, do you know that they have a trained response, like a knee-jerk response, that the internet is, that anything from the internet can't be trusted, but yet they trust Fox News, they trust CNN, and even though we can go straight to the source on the internet, and yes, you have to sift the baby from the bathwater, but we can get straight at the frontline data, but they're trained to ignore it. Is that not right?
It's an excuse. It's an excuse. In the early days, years ago, they used to say, oh, you believe anything you hear on YouTube. It's like, no, I was listening to a lecture by Dr. Blaylock on YouTube. I was listening to a lecture by Dr. Yayub. I was listening to it. It's not because it's on YouTube that suddenly did it. I was listening to trained, fully qualified, licensed doctors who have done this research. But the reason people say that, and I know you know this, Dane, and Doug knows this, is because they're looking for a way out. I have talked to colleagues about this in very calm, a very scientific way, a very polite way, and people get up and walk out of the room without saying a word. They are scared to death. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to face it. It is a fearful, cowardly reaction. Doug?
Yeah, that's totally true, and it goes back to the matrix programming. We're all supposed to go along with what we're told, and if you start questioning the system, you're automatically suspect and you're automatically labeled a conspiracy theorist. So that what you're saying, Russ, is exactly true.
Isn't that conspiracy theorist term the most astoundingly ridiculous term, as if there's never been a conspiracy? the whole planet is filled with conspiracies, is it not? Anytime two criminals conspire, let's take the official 9/11 story. This is truly astounding to me. The textbook definition, the official story, is a conspiracy, is it not? The official story that a bunch of Arabs got together and somehow some diabetic Arab in a cave with no communications outwitted the U.S. military while planes flew around for a couple hours over the most protected airspace in the world and nobody could find them. But that's the official story on 9/11 is a conspiracy. But yet we don't see that word being used in that case, do we? Is it?
I'm looking at an article right now. The CIA coined the term conspiracy theorist. 1967, specifically wrote April 1967 in a dispatch. They termed the term conspiracy theorist in order to discredit those who were spreading this information in what they called psychological operations against the public. This is a CIA operation to discredit people who are telling the truth against the public.
And how well has that worked? Where we can have Building 7, the third building that most people didn't even know there was a third building on 9/11. And let's just to think about that for a moment. A 47-story steel structure high-rise building collapses in 7 seconds, free fall speed, never got hit by anything, had some furniture burning on the first floor, and we're supposed to believe that furniture fire caused that building to collapse at free fall speed? What's wrong with people's sense of reason? What's wrong with their ability to think their way out of this box when something is that blatantly obvious that the official story it couldn't be further from the truth? And back to the spraying. How obvious could this be that this is going on? And who could possibly think it's not going on when they can see it with their own eyes? And people argue, I've had people say, if you only do this test, if you only do that test, that would clear all the smoke from the air. No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. I don't care if you somehow, if you got away with flying a plane right up behind one of these military tankers spraying away and you took a sample and you tested that sample, not that you could get away with that, and I'm not going to do it because I know you can't get away and I know it wouldn't prove anything because we know it's on the ground already. We have the tests and nobody's paying any attention to that. So those who don't want to believe, like you just correctly said, Russ, they will find any excuse not to believe if they don't believe what they see with their own eyes because they're not ready to wake up. They're not ready to wake up.
We're down to about 30 seconds, and Dane,
we're down to 90 seconds.
Pressure.
We got 90 seconds still, Russ, I think is what we got. But anyway, so we have a little bit longer. But again, I want to press everybody to make every day count. The climate is unraveling at absolutely breakneck speed. Copy flyers, pass them out, figure out what rock you haven't turned over, what stone you haven't looked under. Start spot fires. Russ, Doug, you can finish.
Absolutely, yeah. This is GeoEngineering Watch Radio, Dane. It's social pressure that they're using against them to make them too afraid to be rejected by their friends and family. Any last words, Doug, really quickly?
We got about 30 seconds, so you got time, Doug. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I think everybody covered it, and I didn't really have anything to add.
Well, let's finish with this, and let's make every day count. All of us are needed in this battle.
Absolutely. This is GeoEngineering Watch Radio. We are here every Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Blog Talk Radio. Please visit geoengineeringwatch.org. Invite your friends back next week. It's Tuesday.